Hello, folks. Heather Agnew here, senior yoga educator and yoga philosophy nerd. And today we're going to talk about the four virtues. The four virtues are one of the teachings of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which is a foundational text in yoga philosophy and ethics. And we shared this discussion in our most recent group coaching session, but there was a tech glitch with the recording, so I'm having to record again. But I'm kind of happy about that because it's given me some time to reflect on all the great questions and insights that you all shared in our discussion, and also clarify a few of the examples and ideas that I wanted to share. So today we're going to explore the essence of the virtues. I'll give you some quick examples on how we might integrate these virtues into our yoga practice and everyday lives. And then we'll have a longer discussion of how these might show up in our modern lives and how we might share these teachings in our yoga classes. I also have some journal prompts for you if you're wanting to journal or write or just think about these concepts for your own learning, or to potentially bring some philosophy to your classes. So let's dig into the four virtues. To begin, if you've not yet begun a deeper study of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, here is a quick 1-minute primer. This is a text that was written about 1500 to 2000 years ago and includes 196 verses or threads, think sutras, which weave together to give us some guidance on yoga philosophy, ethics, and a progressive approach to the practice of yoga. And there's tons of translations out there, which I'll talk about in a bit. But for the most part, they all agree that the central tenet of this text and the aim of yoga is to settle the mind or quiet the mind. And in that quiet or in that silence, we can discover our essential nature, the effortless being of the self. And the Yoga Sutras provide us guidance on that settled mind and on walking the path of yoga through practices like ethics, movement, breath work, concentration, meditation, and the journey to self-realization, and both the learning and the obstacles that we might experience along the way. And some key elements of the sutras that you might be interested to explore are those 8 limbs of yoga. Also, there's 5 types of thoughts, 9 obstacles to knowledge, 5 causes of suffering, and the 4 virtues, which is what we're going to talk about today. And you might wonder, what does an ancient book tell us about how to approach modern life? They weren't written when we had 9-to-5 jobs and car payments and social media and notifications bombarding us every day. And on the surface, I think the sutras might not seem to be addressing the pressing political and environmental and human rights issues of our time. But I think that these teachings are written with a clarity of understanding of human nature and the nature of the mind and basic ethics that is timeless. And because these 196 sutras are very short and succinct, you'll find that there are many different ways to interpret and different ways to think about and apply these teachings. Even within ourselves, we'll interpret the sutras differently at different times in our lives or when facing different challenges or different experiences. So as we spend time with the sutras, as we dig a little deeper within each thread, I think that we can find guidance for our modern, human, messy lives, or at least get curious about a yogic approach to consciousness and meditation and our responsibility to our communities and our planet in living a life of compassionate action. So all that said, let's get into the four virtues. So today we're picking out just one sutra, just one thread to explore. And that is the four virtues. You can find this if you've got your own copy of the Yoga Sutras in chapter 1, Sutra 33. And this sutra says that the mind becomes clear and serene when the qualities of the heart are cultivated. Maitri, friendliness towards the joyful. Karuna, compassion toward the suffering. Mudita, happiness toward the virtuous. And Upeksha, impartiality towards the non-virtuous. So 4 virtues: friendliness, compassion, happiness, and impartiality. So let's take a moment to just explore quickly the pronunciation, the essence of each of those virtues, and we'll take a look at maybe a quick example, how we might put this into practice, how we might find a strategy for each of these virtues. So the first is Maitri, friendliness, and specifically friendliness towards the joyful. The Sanskrit pronunciation is Maitri or Maitri. And in English, this means like friendliness or unconditional friendship or loving kindness. And the essence of this virtue is to extend unconditional friendliness towards others in their joyfulness. So an example of this might be like a friend or a coworker gets a promotion or gets recognition of some kind, and you genuinely congratulate them instead of feeling envious or feeling like you have to compare yourself. So in practice, when someone shares their joy with you, listen with full attention and share their happiness without comparison, without judgment. And a strategy that you might use for this virtue is to keep a journal. That might be a normal journal, a gratitude journal, and include moments when you feel joy for someone else's happiness. It kind of trains your mind to celebrate other people's happiness and joy and success. So that's Maitri, friendliness. The second is Karuna, compassion. So this virtue is compassion towards the suffering. And the Sanskrit pronunciation is Karuna. And in English, this means compassion. Essentially, it's the desire for all beings to be free from suffering. And it's the practice of extending our compassion and our empathetic thoughts and actions for those who are suffering. So an example of this is you notice someone's struggling with their health or facing a difficult time. And instead of judging or offering unsolicited advice, you extend kindness by simply being present and offering support. A way you can practice this virtue is volunteering for a cause that matters to you, that helps people in need, a food bank, a shelter, a hotline. And a strategy that you can bring into your practice is active listening. So when someone shares their struggles with you, try to avoid the urge to judge or to try to fix things and instead focus on empathetic understanding. So that's Karuna, compassion. The third is Mudita, joyfulness. And this virtue is joyfulness towards the virtuous. The Sanskrit pronunciation is Mudita. And in English, this relates to joyfulness or happiness or empathetic or sympathetic joy. And the essence here is the delight in the cheerful good works of others, to find happiness in others living a good and ethical life. And an example of this is like maybe you've got a friend who consistently acts with great integrity and kindness. and you feel genuinely inspired and joyful rather than intimidated or comparing yourself. In practice, I think that we can make it more of a practice in our lives to take time to acknowledge and appreciate role models or people in your life who demonstrate those ethical and virtuous qualities. So, one strategy is writing people thank you notes, acknowledging them, sharing a social media post, celebrating someone whose actions have positively impacted you or others. So, just offering that recognition. So, that's number 3. Number 4 is Upeksha, and this is equanimity or indifference, and specifically towards those who are less than virtuous. In my own translation of the sutras, it talks about impartiality to the wicked. I tend to use words like non-virtuous because the word wicked makes me laugh. But you'll find that there's different interpretations and different translations of the text. And this relates to equanimity or impartiality or imperturbability. So in practice, this is like being impartial towards those who are not living a good and ethical life. And an example of this is, say you encounter someone being rude, instead of reacting with anger or judgment, you might remind yourself that their behavior might stem from their own pain or unawareness. And that can allow you to respond calmly without letting it disturb your peace. A way we can practice this in our everyday lives is to establish healthy boundaries and trying to maintain a neutral, non-reactive attitude towards negative behavior. And so a strategy that we can employ is that when we're dealing with challenging people or challenging situations, to practice mindfulness and to try to remain present and observant of our thoughts and emotions without attachment or aversion. We're going to talk a lot more about this particular virtue in a moment because it's one that I struggle with. And in our discussion, a lot of people felt they struggled with this one. And as I said, these are open to interpretation, and how you practice these virtues might change as you move through your life. But I think it's useful to return to the original sutra, especially when we have questions or challenges or we're not sure how to employ these virtues, to remember that the aim of the virtues is to cultivate the qualities of the heart in order to make our minds clear and serene. So that's something to remember. So that's kind of a brief intro. Before we dive into further examples of the 4 virtues, there's something that I wanted to share. Lately, I have been struggling to find a cohesive narrative with yoga philosophy. I think about the small mindful actions that I can take, but like, how do they connect to the bigger picture? And we're often reflecting on the behavior of others, but it's kind of easy to overlook our own or the thoughts that eventually lead to our actions. And this is something I think about a lot. And at times I do question the relevance of spending so much energy thinking about yoga philosophy and ethics when there's so much chaos and suffering in the world. Like, real harms are happening to real people right now, every day. But I guess I'm trying to work with the idea that in this context, I need to focus on what I can control. And for me, that means working on my small things, how I treat others and the planet, how I care for myself and my loved ones, how I try to continue to learn and live a life of integrity and compassion. And maybe these small acts aren't insignificant. They're like building blocks, like the foundation, and can strengthen us to take on bigger challenges with hopefully greater clarity and greater resilience. I think that when it comes to ethics, small things are maybe never just small things. They're like a training ground. And they teach us to act with awareness and intention and building the capacity we need to address the larger issues in the world. So take Upeksha, equanimity, for example. For me, it's not about never feeling anger, because I do. It's about not staying stuck in anger. It's about being able to observe it and move through it and find relief and peace and even joy again. When we see bad things happening in the world, and that resilience allows us to face challenges without losing touch with the full range of life's experiences, or losing touch with the goal, which is a life of peace for everyone. So as we explore the four virtues together, I do encourage you to view them from different perspectives and think about how they might apply in your own life, or how they relate or don't relate to the complexities of your modern life. And if you find some elements confusing, you're joining me there. And that's why we keep studying and practicing and exploring and discussing. So let's dive into some examples as we look at these virtues a little more deeply within the context of our hectic and complicated modern lives. So let's start with friendliness towards the joyful, Maitri. And what I wanted to share on that one is that, like, when we can be genuinely happy for others, we create a space for ourselves to be joyful in our own lives. By celebrating others' happiness or accomplishments, I think that we reinforce the belief that success and happiness are not a limited resource, but something we can all share and experience. But in today's world, especially on social media, I think this can be challenging to practice. So instead of simply just being happy for someone else's success or amazing holiday or beautiful photo shoot, we might, perhaps through insecurity or jealousy or a sense of lack, we might find ourselves emulating or copying what someone else is doing. And I think that this can lead us to act in ways that are inauthentic. So for instance, if you've ever noticed a content creator whose posts begin to shift away from their original style or message, and sometimes it's that they've been influenced by trends or likes or followers, and they've maybe unintentionally veered away from their real mission. And this pattern is quite common. And while it might seem like a smart strategy for growing a social media following, it can result in losing touch with who we really are. And as yoga teachers or practitioners, it can be easy to see someone else's success and feel the urge to emulate their path. But my question is, at what point does that emulating become adjusting ourselves to achieve success? And does that lead us away from our true selves? And a powerful practice is learning to admire someone else's success and be happy for them and extend friendliness towards them without jealousy, without finding fault in them, without finding fault in yourself, and without trying to emulate them in ways that compromise your authenticity. I think that when we let jealousy or imitation guide us, we risk losing ourselves. And for yoga teachers, this might look like, parroting the ideas or cues or beliefs of a teacher we admire, which can be part of our learning journey. And it's natural to be inspired by others. But over time, I think this can lead us to end up teaching their classes instead of our own. And when that happens, the world misses out on what makes us unique. And I've definitely personally experienced this, repeating what my teacher said because I was inspired by them and I thought they were cool, only to later realize that I didn't really fully believe in those ideas. They didn't really track with my values or my ethics. And in some cases, they contradicted my own values or felt harmful. Um, and so being able to observe ourselves and watch that we're not being led away from our authentic selves, I think is important. And practicing Maitri reminds us to celebrate others while staying true to ourselves and rooting ourselves in authenticity, so that our happiness and our success comes from a place of genuine alignment with who we are. Um, so my question to consider on this one is like to take some time to reflect on how you might shift a perspective to celebrate others without comparison or imitation, and how you can align yourself with your unique path while you're still being inspired by those around you. So that's something to think about. Um, let's talk about our next virtue, compassion for those who are suffering. Um, so practicing compassion, I think, often asks us to confront and overcome our own biases. And in my world here in North America, which is heavily influenced by puritanical values, often people are perceived as lazy or not productive enough, and are frequently denied kindness and empathy as a result. And this mindset, which is often rooted in ableism and all the isms, and the just world fallacy, the belief that people's suffering must be a result of their moral failings. Um, this mindset, I think, can prevent us from extending true compassion. And compassion challenges us to see beyond these judgments and beliefs and to recognize the humanity in everyone, regardless of their circumstances. Um, so, for example, when we see someone who's struggling with physical challenges or mental health challenges, instead of rushing to assign blame or assume they could fix their situation if they just tried harder, we could pause and choose to offer understanding and support instead. And this might mean listening without judgment, offering practical help, or just simply acknowledging their pain, being with them in a space of support. And in our yoga teaching, this reminds us to create inclusive, accessible spaces that honor the diversity of human experience. And it's an opportunity to adapt our teaching to meet students where they're at, whether they're dealing with physical limitations, emotional struggles, other pressures. By practicing this virtue, Karuna, compassion, I think we also become more attuned to the lives and needs of others and deepen our connection to ourselves and the collective human experience. So my question for this one is, how do we go about challenging our own biases and cultivate genuine compassion in our daily lives? How can we create environments where everyone feels seen and respected and supported, especially those who are struggling? So that might be something you want to take some time to think about or journal about. Um, and next, let's talk about our third virtue, happiness towards the virtuous. Mudita. So the example of mudita I was thinking about relates to how we express our happiness or pleasure when someone's getting it right, like when we're teaching or coaching or parenting. Or the example I was thinking of was when you're training a dog. So I find that often it's our first impulse or unconscious or learned urge to punish bad behavior. So, like when you're puppy training, I think back to our first puppy class with our dog Bob, and that they took the whole first session without the dogs even being present to explain to us that the science overwhelmingly supports the opposite approach, that rewarding good behavior is a far more successful and ethical strategy. Um, and so positive reinforcement training's been seen to make dogs more confident, more relaxed, and it helps build a stronger relationship between you and your dog. So we could think about this in the context of mudita, like to celebrate when people are learning and growing and living ethical lives and making ethical choices rather than running around punishing people for infractions or bad behavior or things that we don't want to see. So this is a way that we could be practicing mudita. Um, so some things to think about on this. To think about how this type of positive reinforcement might benefit our relationships with others, or our teaching, or our coaching, or our relationship with ourselves. Are we using that positive reinforcement? Um, and the other question I have for reflection is, how does this feel for you uh, in relation both to this virtue and to that overriding aim of the four virtues to overcome our unconscious urges and cultivate the qualities of the heart? So, those are some things that you might meditate on, journal on, bring into your practice. The last virtue, equanimity toward those who are non-virtuous. So let's consider Upeksha, equanimity to those who are wicked or unethical. Um, Equanimity invites us to remain steady and balanced, even when we're disturbed by the actions of others. So the example we talked about the other day, and this comes up a lot in yoga philosophy, is where someone cuts you off in traffic and your immediate reaction might be anger or frustration, which alters your state of mind and maybe even your perception of the other person. And what causes this reaction? Often it's rooted in fear or frustration or assumptions that we impose on that other person. They don't care about me. They think they're more important. They're a terrible driver. But what if we paused and considered other possibilities? Maybe they missed their turn. They're having an emergency. They didn't see you. They're lost. Shifting our perspective can help us respond with equanimity rather than letting that fleeting moment on your morning commute disrupt your peace for minutes, hours, the whole day. Um, Unless immediate action is required, so if someone's driving dangerously or they're having a health crisis, can you just let those kind of incidents slide? And if not, you might ask yourself why. So are you reacting out of fear or frustration, or letting that moment connect to a larger narrative about how the world is becoming ruder or more chaotic, and suddenly that one driver represents everything wrong with the modern world, and your reaction becomes disproportionate to the actual event, right? Practicing equanimity in these moments can bring greater peace and happiness. It allows us to separate isolated incidents from broader judgments. And it can help us to not take small frustrations and expand them into larger emotional burdens. Um, so those are like the small things. I have trouble with this one, as I said. What about more significant situations when people or groups or institutions are acting with a lack of integrity or they're causing harm? This isn't about someone being rude or cutting off in traffic. It's about real harm to people or animals or the planet. Do we let that slide? I think for me, right now, practicing equanimity here doesn't mean ignoring injustice. Instead, it's about finding balance. Resistance and action are important, but so are rest and joy and hope. And carrying the weight of the world's problems 24/7 is exhausting, and it can lead to burnout, and it can lead to despair. So equanimity reminds us not to lose sight of what we're fighting for. It teaches us to resist harm and oppression while holding on to hope and holding on to our humanity. And by staying grounded, we can remain effective in our efforts to create change without letting anger or exhaustion overwhelm us. So, thoughts to consider on this one. How can we respond to daily frustrations with greater equanimity? And how can we balance our commitment to justice with the need for rest and renewal so that we don't lose ourselves in the process? Something to take to your journaling practice, your meditation practice, or your walk in the forest to think about. Um, So those are some examples. I hope they've given you some ideas on where you might begin your own inquiries. Um, I'll share a few prompts to help maybe bring to your own learning. So when it comes to sharing these ideas, some things you might think about are how you might explain these concepts of the four virtues to someone new to yoga or new to yoga philosophy. What practices or habits could you develop to embody those virtues and to positively impact your everyday interactions? And number three, how do you see these virtues aligning with modern challenges like social media, like divisive conversations? So, three things that you can think about for sharing this in your everyday life. Three teaching prompts. So, for those of you who are yoga teachers, imagine you're teaching a yoga class. How might you incorporate one or more of these virtues into your theming, your sequencing, a reading you share, some closing remarks? How might you use storytelling or personal experience or examples to illustrate the practice of one of the virtues in your teaching? And three, you might sketch out a plan for how you could present the virtues in a class, in a workshop. You might include reflections, activities, so that other people can understand them and practice them. So those are some prompts for you to take away. I promised I'd talk to you about finding a text. And if you do not yet have a copy of the sutras, as I said, there's tons of translations out there. Do a quick search and you'll find that there's lots of translations and versions out there. I think it's worth exploring a few different translations over your lifetime to compare and contrast different perspectives. Every translator adds their own ideas, their own insights, has their own lens to look at the sutras. And there's lots of opportunities depending on your learning style to find a copy of the sutras that works for you. Not just the translator, but like there's books, there's audiobooks, there's free downloadable PDFs if you want to have a taste without committing. And of course, these days there's going to be podcasts out there. There's going to be YouTube discussion videos like this one. If you want a good text to start with, this version, translated by Alistair Shearer, I think is quite good. It's simple and uncomplicated, and I think it's a great beginning to the study of yoga philosophy. Okay, this has been a long one. Let's get ready to close. As I said, my own relationship with these virtues has been complicated lately. Given everything happening in the world, I've found it challenging to reconcile these ideals at times. But preparing for this discussion has been incredibly helpful. It's given me a chance to clarify my own thoughts, to hear from others and their interpretations, to do some research, which has all really deepened my understanding and helped me find a narrative for this moment in my life and some ways that I can keep practicing these virtues in a way that I think is relevant. I hope this discussion has encouraged you to think about the four virtues and get curious and ask questions. One of the most common questions I get from students is like, what is right? And I don't know, but what I'll say to that is that we are not helped by black and white thinking, by thinking we have to get this ethics thing perfect every time. The idea is that you try and you build capacity for conscious thoughts and words and actions. And yoga, the practice of yoga, helps to build that capacity. So perhaps we are better served by letting go of the idea that you have to get this right and allow yourself to be a beginner, to learn through experience and curiosity. And as I said, they are open to interpretation. They might change as you move through your life. But it's always useful to return to the original sutra to remember that the aim of these four virtues is to cultivate the qualities of the heart in order to make our minds clear and serene and hopefully make our world a better place. So that is all from me. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, and comments. And otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much.